So a little bit of background information. We are all either CS or CIT majors. We are all seniors, and we all have some sort of experience in working in the IT field, either public or private industries. So obviously, cybersecurity is a big problem. If you haven't heard, everybody heard about Sony, Target, and a few other situations where data was breached or stolen. And unfortunately, public institutions are at higher risk due to the lack of financial support, lack of know-how, and within the public institutions, K through 12 education institutions are even lower in that, or higher in level of vulnerability because they're not seen as law enforcement or security type based, so it's just they get even less know-how and less financial support. So to show you the vulnerabilities that these institutions have, we'll present a few case studies. First, the case studies I'll present are from outside what we call public institutions. First one being Danielsburg Central School District in New York. They had got a total of $3.8 million stolen in the year 2010, starting on December 28th on Friday. $1.89 million were transferred out of their district bank accounts. The next Monday, another $1.19 million was transferred out of their bank accounts. And it wasn't until Tuesday where only $0.7 million was transferred out that the bank actually flagged the transfers, which is an interesting and a whole other level. The school district was notified. The FBI got involved because it was an international affair. It was discovered that it was people from outside the U.S. who were doing the hacking in their system. Unfortunately, they were not able to actually point who the responsible party was. They were able to find out that it was through the use of malicious software. They were able to record the username and passwords of school administrators who had access to the bank accounts. Another prime example is the state of Kansas school system. This is a distributed denial of service attack. If you do not know what that is, it's where you overload a server or a service with a huge amounts of data and it's not able to cope with the amount of traffic. A good example would be a cell phone tower, which is everybody's trying to call, everyone's trying to, or like Purdue Alert System where you talk too much traffic and it shuts down. Same type of scenario there. They were trying to implement in March 2014, have the state exams go on, so every school district would log on their students. They would, through the internet, access the centralized exam, and then it was all centralized. The distributed denial of service attack completely stopped the exam on Thursday of that week. They tried to implement some security features on Saturday and Sunday, came back Monday, had another whole attack, completely got shut down again, and at this point, they pretty much gave up because the attacks continued all the way through Wednesday of that week. Go ahead and hit the next slide, please. Now, these are case studies for more internal, which is the Corona del Mar High School in California. 11 students hacked into the school network. Hacked, I put quotations because if you're in IT, hacked is a very strong word. They used a packet tracer, not a packet tracer, just a keyboard logger to record the username and passwords of various faculty and school administrators. They were able to go into the grade books, change their grades, steal old exams, and one student was even able to get into a brand new machine who hadn't had the default username and password changed and access faculty information, their pay, how long they've been working, their address. So it was a really very highly debated topic of what to do with these students. These students are actually all expelled from the high school and I think were not allowed to go to any high schools within the state. That's severe, but they were still being prosecuted. And the last is Page High, which is in North Carolina. This is more of your typical accident that most people can see themselves doing. The school employee was emailing a parent over different concern. The parent just had a few issues he wanted answered. Through one of those email exchanges, the school employee attached a PDF file which contained 456 records of students' district ID numbers, courses they were registered, their grades, even their parents' addresses. Fortunately, in this situation, the parent that received the email was very well aware of the situation that was going on, deleted the file, immediately notified the school employee, and the school employee and the parent both notified the proper authorities. Upon a full report, they realized that yes, indeed, it was just an accident. There was no malicious intent on part of the school employee. They were relieved that the parent didn't have any agenda to carry on, and then only just revealed some of the weak policies the school had regarding keeping their information safe. So now we'll pass it on to Michael, who will talk about some of the legislation that is in place and how it is not or is helping regarding cybersecurity in our public education institutions.
Okay, so when you talk about cybersecurity, the whole process of tracking and I guess pursuing people that have committed cyber crimes is very loosely regulated. There's no set infrastructure to take action against cyber crimes. So the earliest legislation came about as early as 1868, and that wasn't a direct law related to cybersecurity. It was more of a preventative law for where no governmental or military assets could be used to support the pursuing of cyber, I guess, criminals. So when you're talking about cybersecurity, there's two basic industries that support the actions. So there's the Department of Homeland Security. They're responsible for civil sector attacks, which is for schools, businesses, and then just regular human beings. So after that, you have the Department of Defense, which is for military intelligence and counterterrorism efforts. So they go into effect when there's reports of espionage and malicious threats within the United States, also from threats that are received outside of the United States. So most cyber crimes go untried just because of the difficulty that they have of catching the person that commits the crime. So it's very difficult to develop laws and regulations regarding that. But over the past 150 years, there has been many regulations and statutes that have been implemented. And to go over that, there is an 8-step system regarding the severity of how someone that is caught committing a cyber crime can be tried. And it goes from 0 to 30, with 0 being the lowest punishment that ranges from a fine of $5,000 and up to 0 to 6 months in prison. And level 30 is with the attempt of stealing over $400 million, the punishment for that is a maximum of 20 years and a fine of $100,000, which is seemingly low for the amount of money that they stole, but that's what's set in place now. So to name off a few of those, the number of victims that are affected by that, if it's an extraterritorial conflict, so if someone sends a malicious signal from a different country, that would promote another level in the severity of how the person would be tried if they are caught. Sophisticated means if they used a malicious device, so a keylogger on a keyboard here, or a device that's used to record sound for verbal and biometrics, that's also in that category. Trafficking in access devices is much like a keylogger. If you sell that to a person, your fine for the crime that you commit is going up. If you cause a risk of death or injury, a lot of the traffic signals are controlled by computer systems. So if you tamper with that and then you end up causing an injury to people, the fine goes up. To name specifically crimes that have set punishments for them, if you illegally access information either through a school or private businesses, it's a 6-month to 5-year imprisonment. If you illegally modify files, so it's like changing grades in your school book, university, changing businesses, expenditures, that counts in that category. Computer hacking, so going into someone else's machine via wireless transactions. And those are only a few. There's many more that are difficult to, I guess, put into one category, because when one cybercrime is committed, it's usually alongside of another criminal act. So you use your hacking to open up a car dealership and then steal a car. So that's why it's hard to also make regulations for catching cyber criminals. And with that, we have our main focus for our presentation was to be on to help schools and implementing a procedure where we could help them best protect their assets. And for that, we developed a 3-step system. We're going to first develop a secure network. Excuse me. And second, develop group policies within that network, and then help to train and develop educational guidelines within the school system. And I'm going to pass it off to Ian, and he'll talk about the secure network.
All right, so for the secure network, I'm going to try to explain the best I can, so it's not confusing. I don't think all of you are IT majors, so bear with me. Alright, so first part of developing the type of network we want to create is called package filtering centric. And basically, that's just going to filter out what needs to be there and what doesn't need to come into the network. Okay, so this is going to give you a general idea of what packets are. So packets are groups of information, and those information is divided into like bits. So like when you send out like a PDF file over the internet or from one network computer to another, it's all broken down into little bitty pieces and then transferred over the network and brought back together. Each of those pieces are called packets, and each of those packets have different identifiers on them to specify where that piece of information is supposed to go, what it belongs to as a whole, how it's supposed to be read, and things like that. So what our filtering system would do is read those identifiers on each packet and determine, okay, does this belong in the network? Is this something that has been authorized, or is this possibly a virus or some type of malware that might be trying to access the network? So most operating systems have this within your computers and laptops and things like that. And we refer to them as firewalls. But firewalls are actually routers, as in physical hardware, not necessarily the software. But just because packet filtering is 2 words and firewalls is more fun, we just say firewalls for a general software. But for a network, we're going to have multiple routing or routers or firewalls the main function is to filter packets that come into the network. So within our network, there are going to be 4 major zones: internet, private, remote access, and demilitarized. So with internet, that's general connectivity to pretty much anything that's external to the system. Devices such as mobile phones, other computers or laptops that aren't within the network of the institution. And then any devices that are using the network access to access the internet, sites and other applications that might use internet connectivity. That's all going to be within the internet zone. The private and remote access zones is where we're going to house most of our sensitive information. So social security numbers, student identification, user ID, password, credentials, such as those things, grades, and all that. That's where most of that information is going to be stored and where we want to protect the most. Within the private, that's basically, if you can think about it, this computer here, for instance, would be in the private network of the school. So basically all the computers and devices that are housed within the school, within that network, I guess if you can think about it, physically wired into the network, would be what you want considered as the private zone. Remote access, so virtual private networks, LAN, WAN, so wide area networks and local access networks, local area networks. So if you have teachers or students who have software to remote access from home into the network to view their grades, to upload homework, download material, things like that, that would kind of go into the remote access zone. And the demilitarized is probably one of our most important ones. With this zone is meant to contain any kind of malware, virus, anything that gets corrupted, any kind of compromise in the material. Contain it so that way we can solve that issue without it spreading to the rest of the areas and affecting us. So, for instance, if malware were to spread and start collecting data or copying information from the servers, the demilitarized zone is the place where that would be caught, identified, and then we'd be able to solve the problem there rather than it spreading to the rest of it. So that's that. And here's just a kind of a visual example of it. So we have our internet here. Anything that we access from the internet, all those external sources will come through. Our firewall is kind of that major line of defense. And of course it doesn't, filter out everything. In our demilitarized zone, where we would house actual machines for our different services, email, web server, different proxies, and DNS. And when we have problems with a particular thing, anything that comes up, we try to handle it within that particular zone. Now, if the demilitarized zone may not catch or be able to handle everything. So you may have a malware that gets all the way to the private or HQ zone or remote access zone, especially since you might be So especially with remote access, you're going to be doing it from your own laptop. So if you have a virus on your laptop, and that has the ability to transfer as far as based on what network you're using, it may the issue may arise in a particular zone, not necessarily the demilitarized zone. But because they are different zones and they're kind of sectioned off, we can also isolate it within those separate areas. So that provides another level of security. So if one area goes down, we don't have to shut down everything else to fix it. Or maybe the remote access is completely gone. At least we have our private zone to continue to function until everything else is restored. Next slide. So our second part to the solution is developing group policies. So every user that interacts with the system should have some kind of restriction and permissions on what they're allowed to do and how they're allowed to use the system. So what group policy does is something that you can set up within the computer software to actually authorize people to use certain applications, certain files, folders, things like that. And so you can give them that permission and you can take it away or limit it. So you can go down, as I said, files, folders, different applications. You might think of applications such as like the gradebook that a teacher uses. You want a teacher to be able to use that, to update that, edit it, and view it. But maybe for the student, they can only view the grades. You wouldn't want them to have access to edit it. So that'd be something that you definitely want to specify within your group policies. If you can go down to computers, as far as different computers in the network, you can specify, okay, well, students are only allowed to use computers within the specified lab. And that can definitely prevent if a student were to sneak into one of the administrative offices and try to change a grade or something like that. If they can't log into the computer in the first place, then that prevents a lot of problems. So when you set up the group policies, it should really be in kind of a hierarchy form. You're going to have some major groups that you can define your users in, and then as you trickle down, depending on the variety of users you have, you can specify different specifications. So here's just kind of a general example. So for school, you might have students, faculty, and guests. But within students, you'll have people within different grades. With faculty, you might have administration, teachers, IT. Then I can go on to cafeteria, maintenance staff, anyone who wants to use the system you want to include. And you just want to assign permissions given that way. So with group policies, instead of assigning an individual permissions, you can assign like a student the permission, and it will trickle down to everyone else. So you definitely want to go through the thousands of students at Purdue and give them all the permission to actually access Purdue's network. You will just want to register them as a student when they register for classes, things like that, and then in general give students access to the internet, access to the network, or certain networks, things like that. And now I'm going to turn on to Mike for the organization guidelines.
So to quickly address that, there's 4 levels in the education department that we should focus on. One being the students, the second being the faculty and the executive staff of that school. The third is the software that's available, and the fourth would be passwords. So Ian touched on it briefly. The executive staff, they should have the loosest permissions with regards to the system. They obviously have the most use over the system other than the system administrator. And the students have the strictest. They're unable to access certain websites, use specific software, download links, because that's where the majority of malicious software comes from, is downloading links and clicking on websites. The second, classroom should be restricted to only being able to use for software for that room. And then lastly, passwords, they should be annually checked, not annually, changed twice a semester or trimester, quarter for high schools. And then teaching the students and executive staff tricks of how to lock the computer. Say for a Windows computer, you can hit the Windows L key at the same time, it locks the computer, requires a password for the next use. And those are simple things that can be taught with very little cost related to it. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Thomas to wrap things up.
So just a quick conclusion, we revealed some vulnerabilities for case studies, we shared some legislation, how it's lacking and how it needs to be improved, and then presented a basic solution with the three-pronged approach. So we hope not only to educate public institutions, but to provide a basic building block to better benefit their level of cybersecurity. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
As I go into schools now and try to show videos or clips that we have on our educational material we take with us, if we have to feed it through the system, a lot of schools will no longer let us play even an educational video because can't discriminate between good stuff and bad stuff.
Sorry.
So, at what point do we begin to diminish the value of having computers in classrooms when we become so security minded? And we begin to lock down many of the functions that
It's you win some, you lose some. The more you tighten down, especially on the firewall, the less the traffic goes through, the less data is transmitted, but then the less you can do, the less educational environment conducive the environment is. So it's one of those playoffs, how vulnerable you want to be, but how effective you want to be. And it's something that each institution has to debate itself. Sometimes higher end software will allow you to be more selective and be more flexible, but for the most more often than not, you just have to pick your poison.
When you were doing your research and looking at the schools that have been hacked or there were issues, what did they discuss as the barriers? Why did they get themselves in the particular situation they were in? Lack of resources, lack of knowledge? What were the key aspects of those things?
As I mentioned in the case study with the Kansas City School District, most people don't think cybersecurity. They don't realize that how much private information is in schools, and they've been left behind. Just not even outside, but even inside of the administrative staff, they don't realize that one technology administrator is not enough to run an actual safe environment. So the financial allocation for just the personnel or the actual hardware devices to protect is people haven't thought about it. So that's part of this project, was to raise awareness to those personnel.
To add on a little bit to that, he's talked about the budget for cybersecurity. It's very thin as far as what's allocated to the IT department of the school, since it isn't very heavily looked upon. But the main reason is outdated licensures for software. A lot of the schools are troubled for money, so they just push off updating software, and that's when the firewall and antivirus software gets looked over when they're trying to make decisions about what educational needs they have to implement.
In the case of the school that you mentioned, with them, you're saying like, you were saying that they are being executed or something like that. But in this matter, I've seen that many of the people that has done the bad thing later on, they have been hired like to be the one that is going to be providing security for companies, and so there is like a dual view of cybersecurity, because so in this case of the students, they may see it like a challenge. I mean, it is maybe not that bad intention of them. So what could be done in that matter? Like, because prosecutor is too, I don't know, maybe too much consequences for that kind of act or action.
Right. And to answer that, there was a specific study at high school, I'm not sure the name of it, where a few students, they actually logged into the school's information or info systems, took a bunch of private records, and then notified the families that their information had been taken. So that was a student-done act, and then the administration realized that it wasn't a malicious intent for it. So I would say, to answer part of your question, when students would get hired from that, or people that produce the act, it's when they knowingly go into a system that they shouldn't, and they just prove that it can be done, much less than having a malicious intent when they are committing that act.
For some companies, there is like a new position, not that new, but it's ethical hacker. So it is like someone that is hired for
To
be providing the security within the company. So it's a little bit like that. Like the name ethical hacker is like a contradiction, I think, but it is inside the company. Someone is going to be trying and trying and trying, but everything out of security comes after when something happened, and then it's like fixing, not. It's like a reactive, not before it happened, as I see it, right?
And that's unfortunately how most situations get fixed after something actually has happened.
I'd like to ask one final question in terms of, when you think about a solution for some of these things and needing good IT people in the K through 12 system, who is educated and goes to work for a K through 12 school? I mean, is that something any of the three of you would aspire to do?
For the level of the firewall, actually implemented that same solution last year for Professor Ross, one of his classes. It took us a whole 8 weeks of the lab to fix, about 7 hours apiece, 3 people.